"You're under arrest, old man." The words rang out with finality in the quiet morning of a small town, just as the cold steel of handcuffs tightened around the wrists of a silver-haired man. No reaction, no resistance. Only a steady gaze, strangely calm, as if he had always expected this moment. In the courtroom, a few chuckles echoed. One juror shook his head, and somewhere, faint whispers laced with mockery drifted through the air. To them, he was just an old conservative man. Someone is out of step with the present. Maybe once a soldier, but now just the ghost of a past no one cared to remember. No one asked where he came from or what he had endured. No one wondered what lay behind those eyes. The place where war and memory may still flicker like a dying flame. Society moves fast to label and forgets that some people carry stories too deep to be spoken aloud. And in that silence, injustice creeps in. Quietly, like the man's footsteps into the courtroom, unobtrusive, but powerful enough to halt history itself, if anyone had cared to look deeper. No one in that room, not the stern-faced judge, nor the silent jurors, truly knew who the man sitting quietly in the defendant's chair was. To them, he was simply James Keller, age 65. Just another veteran on the long list of those who had once served and now drifted, forgotten. But there was something they didn't know. The man they were judging had once ended a battle with a single bullet. A shot fired from over 1,000 yards away, cutting through wind, time, and chaos, that saved an entire U.S. unit pinned down between life and death. James never spoke of it. He never mentioned his name in any war report. He carried no medals, no papers. He didn't need to. But someone remembered. Someone was on the way to that very courthouse. A man with 4 silver stars on his shoulder, carrying a truth no one expected. In what seemed like the emptiness of James Keller's stare, it was an epic chapter that the world had forgotten. And in that moment, between apathy and assumption, the past was quietly making its return, not to seek glory, but to reclaim justice for a hero who never needed the spotlight. Jefferson County Courthouse, located on the northern edge of Colorado, was not the place that usually saw high-profile cases. Nestled between an old auto repair shop and a family-owned pharmacy that's been around for 3 generations, the courthouse looked more like a bureaucratic outpost than a hall of justice. That morning seemed no different except for a minor scuffle in the Safeway parking lot, where James Keller, a former Marine sniper, was accused of threatening a younger man in a dispute over a parking space near the handicap zone. No weapons, no injuries. Just a few distorted words twisted into threat of military violence and the intense gaze of a man who had once looked across battlefields, now labeled as aggressive and unstable. It was a seemingly simple case, but behind it was a story society had long ignored. James lived alone in a small wooden cabin on the hillside, where the cell signal was spotty and the internet was almost non-existent. Every morning he walked nearly 3 miles into town not to socialize, but to keep his legs from forgetting the rhythm of the march. Locals knew him as that odd old Keller guy, the one who never spoke, never smiled, never came to town events, and never once spoke of the years he wore the uniform. To them, he was the past. But to James himself, the present was the harder war. Because when a war ends, not everyone makes it home. Some return with their bodies intact, but leave their souls somewhere in the dust. And in the awkward glances and uneasy silence of his neighbors, there was a painful truth. America, great as it may be, has won many wars, but it hasn't always known how to welcome its heroes home. The trial took place on a cold Tuesday morning. The sky was gray, as if reflecting the mood inside Courtroom 2 of the Jefferson County Courthouse. James Keller sat quietly at the defendant's table, face unreadable, eyes avoiding contact, as if he had accepted every judgment the moment he stepped through that heavy, time-worn door. The crowd in the back murmured, not because the case was big, but because whispers had already made their way across town in the days before. "I heard he threatened to kill someone just for cutting in line," a middle-aged woman whispered. The person beside her added, "They say he shot someone in Afghanistan and hasn't spoken since. Lost it completely. No confirmation. No verification." But those words, repeated often enough, slowly turned James from an odd old man into a potential threat. The prosecutor didn't need to try hard. With a calm but deliberate tone, he concluded, "He served, we respect that. But today, in this courtroom, he's not a hero. He's just a citizen, and a dangerous one." No one spoke of James's service record, of the years he spent in the desert, between bullets and blood. Justice here was built on silence and assumptions. And the man sitting before the bench was being convicted not for what he did, but for what he had never said. No one asked what he said that day in the parking lot, because the truth had already been buried, under fear and the laziness of not looking beyond the outdated label. Veteran. Outside the courtroom, while the trial continued with cold accusations and indifferent stares, something was stirring in the small town. A black Chevrolet Suburban pulled into the parking lot. No sirens, no flashing lights, but enough to make the security guard freeze when he saw the man step out. General Raymond Hunt, retired commander of U.S. Special Forces, had silver stars on his shoulders. At the same time, several old pickup trucks began to arrive. The men who stepped out wore no rank, held no power, just gray hair, slightly stooped backs, but eyes that were still sharp. They said little, just firm handshakes, silent nods. A code among them. They were the men who had once stood beside James Keller, in nameless places, who had heard the last breaths of dying brothers, and survived because of one man's terrifyingly accurate shots. James. No one had invited them. They simply knew. The message had gone out in silence, with no subject line, no signature. Riggs in trouble. One line. Enough to make them drop what they were doing, abandon memories they tried to bury, and show up. They didn't come for attention. They came because they owed a man something bigger than gratitude. The truth. And while the courtroom doors remained closed, outside, the sound of boots on concrete grew louder. Not a protest. Not a spectacle. Just the quiet arrival of witnesses, ready to speak for the man who never would. James Keller was not alone. And if justice turned its back, they would testify in his place. The courtroom door creaked open, no fanfare, no commotion, yet every eye in the room instinctively turned, as if drawn by an invisible force. In a perfectly pressed uniform, General Raymond Hunt entered. His steps were unhurried, yet so resolute that the entire room seemed to pause. The 4 silver stars on his shoulders required no introduction. Even the court clerk, who had been absent-mindedly shuffling papers, snapped to attention. Hunt did not glance around. He didn't look for a seat, didn't acknowledge the prosecutor or the judge. His eyes locked on a single point. The silver-haired man sitting at the defendant's table, hands resting quietly on the cold wooden surface. And in that brief moment, between a general and a veteran, an invisible current passed between them. James Keller finally looked up, not because of attention, not out of fear, but because he recognized that gaze, the eyes of a man who had once seen him through a rifle scope from over 1,000 yards away, across a battlefield stained with rubble and blood. No words were exchanged, but the silence was no longer indifference. It was respect. The entire courtroom held its breath. The prosecutor furrowed his brow, the judge sat up straight, and the jurors felt as though they had just stepped into a scene no one had prepared them for. No one said a word, yet with one look, General Hunt returned to James, something society had taken, his dignity, and with one purposeful step toward the old soldier, he made everyone in that courtroom understand. The man they were about to condemn, it was the same man who once preserved the very freedom they stood on. The air turned still. The room froze. Hunt's eyes never left Keller, but his voice rang out, firm and unwavering, as he turned to the bench. "Your Honor," he said. His hand rested gently on the polished buttons of his uniform. "I request permission to speak." The judge, a woman in her 50s with a seasoned air, seemed momentarily caught off guard by the uninvited but unmistakable presence. She stood slowly, nodding with measured respect. "General Hunt, please state the reason for your appearance today." He stepped into the center of the room, where every gaze converged. His voice was clear and forged from years of battlefield briefings. "I am not here to defend a friend. I am here to speak the truth. And the truth is this. James Keller saved my life and the lives of 12 other soldiers in Taji, Iraq, on a day none of us believed we would survive." The room fell silent. Hunt continued. "We were surrounded, out of ammo, bleeding. 2 men were critically wounded. No reinforcements, no radio contact. And then shots, one by one, from far away. Unerring, each one bought us time. James Keller, alone, on the roof of a crumbling building, took out 14 insurgents in under 6 minutes. The final shot, through a narrow steel gate, 60 yards, with crosswinds at 15 miles per hour, broke the siege. He paused, eyes welling. He didn't wait for thanks. He didn't report in. When we went back to find him, he was gone, as if saving our lives was just part of the job, not worth mentioning. Then he turned to the judge. His voice is lower now, but weighted with resolve. If today we convict this man for a look, for words no one verified, then we are losing something far more precious than any verdict: our ability to recognize courage when it chooses not to announce itself. Oh, General Raymond Hunt stepped toward James Keller with an unusual stillness, as if each footstep carried decades of waiting and something that had never been said aloud. The courtroom fell utterly silent. Every eye was fixed on the two men, one once revered for wielding immense authority, and the other, an old soldier in handcuffs, who had sat silently all morning. No one said a word. As Hunt slowly knelt, head bowed, his hand gently resting on his knee, not to beg for forgiveness, but to offer an apology. I've spent nearly 20 years searching for the man who saved my life. For almost 2 decades, I didn't know who that sniper was. The military never named him. No one knew. And now, just as I found him, he's being prosecuted. Because of rumors, because of a silence that was misinterpreted. The air vanished from the room. The jury had just returned from deliberation, but none of them sat. One young man covered his mouth, eyes glistening. An older woman wiped her tears in silence. Another simply lowered his head, not out of shame for the defendant, but from shame in himself. General Hunt didn't need to say more. In that moment, he did what only the truly great ever dare to do. He placed his honor at the feet of a man society had forgotten, not out of duty, not for optics, but out of gratitude, a gratitude that transcends rank. He doesn't need defending. He needs to be acknowledged, Hunt whispered. The truth was no longer in the trial transcripts. It was kneeling right before them. And for the first time, James Keller was no longer seen as a defendant, but as a living piece of history, a symbol of quiet courage, in the face of an America that must not be forgotten. The moment General Hunt knelt before James Keller, time itself seemed to halt. No clicking cameras, no typing, no whispers. Everyone froze, not in shock, but because they realized they were witnessing something far beyond law, an unspoken apology, a vow to restore the dignity of a forgotten man. James looked down at the man kneeling before him. His eyes were still calm, but deep within, a storm raged. All these years, he had never bowed his head, never asked for recognition. He lived quietly, never spoke of valor, never reached for medals. And now, the very man he saved, a 4-star general, an emblem of might and command, was kneeling in public gratitude. James didn't rush to respond. He didn't ode. He didn't cry. He didn't utter a thank you. Instead, he rose slowly, his bones creaking under the weight of memory, and extended his hand. That hand, rough, calloused, the same hand that once steadied a rifle to protect young soldiers in a burning desert, now clasped the general's hand. With the steady grace of a man who knew his worth, there was no victory, no glory, only understanding between two men who once stood on opposite sides of life and death, in a courtroom silent and humbled, that finally saw a veteran not for what he had said, but for what he had done. In the moment James Keller gripped the general's hand, something sacred swept through the air. No one dared to break it. They knew justice had just entered the room, not through legal argument, but through an act that could never be captured in a verdict. The judge-keeper of the scales of justice adjusted her glasses, masking eyes that had just grown moist. She took a deep breath, rose from the bench, as if the weight of truth itself had settled on her shoulders. Her voice trembled, yet rang clear, echoing in the wooden hall. In light of the extraordinary facts just presented, and after careful consideration of the full context, this court hereby dismisses all charges against Mr. James Keller, effective immediately. The gavel came down, not forcefully, not theatrically, but with a weight that surpassed every ruling made that day. James Keller, once handcuffed, misjudged, and viewed as a threat, was now free to rise. As his true self, a soldier, a silent hero, an American who asked for nothing but fairness. He didn't rush out. He turned first. His gaze swept the room. There was no resentment, only the quiet forgiveness of a man who had seen worse than a misunderstanding. The cuffs came off. No longer a cold, indifferent clatter, but a gesture of respect, seen clearly in the hands of the officer who released him. For the first time in years, James Keller left a battle, not with triumph, but with recognition. And this time, he didn't walk out alone. He left the courtroom without applause, without camera flashes, but in a reverent silence that nearly choked the air. Outside, a few veterans stood upright, hands raised in salute, as if in the presence of a living monument. No one spoke of the trial. No one asked how he felt, because they understood. Some men need no introduction, because their lives already speak volumes about courage and sacrifice. James walked slowly, each step pressed into the earth, like a quiet echo of the thousands he had marched before, not by command, but by belief. And today, as he walked out of the courthouse, he was still the same, quiet, steady, needing no words to prove his worth, because his life already had. Not all heroes wear uniforms. Not all arrive to fanfare. Sometimes they wear old shoes, carry a stoop in their spine, and hold in their eyes things no one else dares to see. And though they walk in silence, those protected by their sacrifice must speak. Because if we do not remember, if we do not speak up, then men like James Keller will keep being misunderstood, and the world will slowly forget what honor looks like, what true gratitude truly means. The story of James Keller isn't just the overturning of a trial. It's a wake-up call for all of us. That in this hurried world, where people are so quick to judge based on a glance, a misunderstood word, the truth often waits in silence. For someone brave enough to listen, James doesn't need praise, but he deserves to be seen. Not for what he said, but for what he gave, quietly, steadily, without ever asking for anything in return. Let us not forget, sometimes the most honorable people, they are the quietest ones. And if we don't listen to them today, one day, we may lose them forever. Life isn't measured by how many times we're recognized, but by how many times we choose to do the right thing, even when no one is watching. So listen beyond the silence. Look deeper than the surface. And honor those whose sacrifices shape the freedoms we so easily forget. If you've ever met someone like James, quiet, yet full of dignity, share their story in the comments below. They deserve to be remembered. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, don't forget to subscribe, share this video, and help make sure that somewhere out there, a silent hero finally gets seen.